Our top focus on WION at this hour. The US on Wednesday announced sanctions on Russia's biggest oil producers, hitting the critical pillars of Moscow's economy. Now, those curbs are also the first major package of financial punishments on President Vladimir Putin's economy under Trump 2.0. The new sanctions are scheduled to kick off on November 21st. On Wednesday, the US blacklisted state-run oil giant Rosneft and Lukoil. The sanctions list also included 34 of their subsidiaries and entities which own 50% or more directly in the oil firms. The US warned that any individual or company doing business with these firms will face secondary sanctions. In addition, financial institutions risk sanctions for engaging in transactions or activities with those oil firms. As a result, crude prices surged over 5% on expectations of a cut in Russian oil flows. The US penalties also target Moscow's shadow fleets and are assessed by Kepler to be far more effective as compared to EU or US curbs. Previously, Russia sustained its crude exports despite the logistical challenges posed by UK sanctions targeting the shadow fleet. US has targeted OFAC vessels that ship Russian crude primarily to China, while EU or UK sanctioned ships serve India. According to research by Kepler, vessels added to OFAC's list experience an average productivity decline of 70%. In comparison, the EU or UK sanctioned vessels see a much smaller reduction, estimated at 30%. The US sanctions are a major shift in approach to pressure Russia to the negotiating table to end the Ukraine war, which is now in its fourth year. Previous sanctions and efforts like the $60 price cap on Russia were targeted at limiting Kremlin's revenue, but without impacting the flow of barrels. The latest US curbs hit the core of Russian economy, which is dependent on oil revenues, and also marks a U-turn for Trump, who had held off on any major sanctions previously. Earlier this week, the president had also cancelled his meeting with Putin. Trump said it just didn't feel right. We'll meet in the future.
Look, these are tremendous sanctions. These are very big. Those are against their two big oil companies. And we hope that they won't be on for long. We hope that the war will be settled.
On Trump's pressure, the European Union announced a ban on Russian liquefied natural gas imports, further squeezing Moscow's revenue. Together, the US and EU actions could hit tens of billions of dollars in Russian energy revenues. Oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil jointly account for nearly half of Russia's total crude exports, and taxes from the oil and gas industries account for about 40% of Moscow's federal budget. Between them, the two firms export 3.1 million barrels of oil per day, making up 6% of the global output. Now, sanctions against such a critical pillar of the economy are expected to hit Moscow's oil flows to the world. The ripple effects could also be felt much further. Russia will now have to offer deeper discounts if it hopes to shrug off the latest sanctions and lure foreign buyers. Now, Moscow's biggest customers include China and India, the world's two most populous countries, and Turkey. Together, China and India make up most of Russia's energy exports, while China last year purchased a record of more than 100 million tons of Russian crude oil. That accounted for almost 20% of China's total energy imports. Russia accounts for 36% of India's oil imports. India's purchases have grown from a small fraction before the war of some $140 billion. Reports quoting industry sources and refinery executives suggest that Indian oil firms are already looking at sharply curtailing Russian imports.
I think that they'll certainly have an impact. They're massive sanctions. It's sanctions on oil. The two biggest oil companies, among the biggest in the world, but they're Russian. They do a lot of oil. And hopefully it'll push... hopefully he'll become reasonable, and hopefully Zelensky will be reasonable too. You know, it takes two to tango, as they say.